To start with today, we're going to have a look at the map. We're going to have a look at the recent Russian advances and see what implications they have for the wider battle. We're also going to do a deep dive into either side, the Russian and the Ukrainian. We're going to look at what advantages they currently have and what weaknesses they're having to deal with. After that, we're going to have a look at the factors that are ultimately going to draw this conflict to a conclusion. All right, so I'm back with Andrew, and we are going to check out what has been happening in this war. Now, since your last update, which was, let's go back all the way back to, where we're going to go? Let's go back to the start of May.
Yeah. That's so good. So since we spoke last, a lot has transpired. So we probably just backtrack a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, they've already retreated from Kiev at this point, and it's mainly the war in the Donbass and holding of the south.
Yeah, that's correct. So, yeah, and I think Mariupol has fallen at this point, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Now we've got a sort of advance. Basically, from the Russian point of view, they were looking at 3 encirclements: one here, one here, one here, and basically it was getting smaller and smaller. Their ambitions. The first encirclement, they were trying to do a big one, trap all these guys, the Ukrainian experienced fighters in the Donbass. Then they sort of scaled back their ambitions as that wasn't going so well, and they sort of started off with another spearhead in the middle here.
Mm-hmm. You know, they were trying to encircle, as you rightly said, but the point is that the fighters in the Donbass were the elite. They're the Navy SEALs of the Ukraine. These guys have been fighting here for many, many years, and they're damn experienced. So they know their backtrack. They know every field, every little pathway they can get out of there. They backed out really quickly without being cornered or surrounded. So and that's the problem the Russia's having, because they're so mobile. The Ukrainians, they just can't seem to catch them.
Yeah, well, they do have the advantage of being in the defense and setting up defensive lines.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So if we talk about Izium, they had a lot of troops in Izium. There was a big push down Izium way, maybe down this road, maybe to encircle with one of these salients. There was a little breakout here, but didn't go too far. But one of the most important breakouts happening around this time was in Popasna. Now, they broke through the old established defense lines from 2014 and managed to get into Popasna, which I don't think the Ukrainians had particularly good defense lines set up around this area. So it was a bit of a problem for the Ukrainians, because they're obviously still fighting over here for Lysychansk and Severodonetsk.
Yeah, that's right. Which was where most of the heavy artillery was being leveled at, and that was we know now post that they fell, both of them. But yeah, you're right. There was you put your troops, and you only got limited numbers. So they're outnumbered by the Russians like 20-1. So they had to put where they could possibly see they needed the men. So yeah, they just couldn't cover it all.
So if we go through time, you can see they're reinforcing and expanding up that Popasna gap.
Yeah.
And it was almost a danger. Now, the Ukrainians were fighting hard for Severodonetsk at this point. And they even had the international brigade, so a bunch of Navy SEALs and British guys and people from all around the world went in, and they managed to push the Russians back. Now, starting off, the Russians took about 80% of that city, but those guys came in and pushed it back to maybe 50 or less.
Yeah,
however,
that's right.
Over time, the Russians just weighed them down with they've got, I think it's 10-1 artillery shells or 5-1. They're able to fire. The Ukrainians only were able to fire 1 in response to every 5 or 10. And over time, I think the Russian numbers and ammo basically just showed through in that area. And they were obviously in danger of getting cut off here.
So they had to move. You know, that's the whole blueprint of what Russia does. They've done it every single time in most of the conflicts. They just use the heavy artillery, the howitzers. They do the 40-kilometer range and just bombard and just blow the city to pieces. Then just sort of march in and go, it's mine. You know, well, it's just rubble. You got rubble now. And this is what they've been doing. Is they've got that extra length of firepower with the howitzers, and they can just sit back and just blow the front lines of the cities away, and then just keep pushing the Ukrainians back. So that was always going to be that blueprint there, right? But and as it turned out, they were able to take it right through and take Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. Yeah. But
Well, they actually had a river crossing up here near.
Oh, that's the Severodonetsk.
They were caught with artillery.
Yeah, they were, and that river was a really good natural barrier, and that was it held them off for I think about a week and a half. That was just hard for them to cross. The Russians, yeah. I mean, not the Ukrainians, the Russians. Yeah, it was a natural. It was really it worked well with the bridges they'd blown, so they were able to sort of hold that area for longer than maybe giving them the time to evacuate and get out of there. That's probably what they.
Well, I was starting to worry that maybe they might push it a bit far and end up being encircled.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Losing a lot of those troops because they're still fighting. I think it was a whole month. The fight is still around Severodonetsk. They must have had a lot of artillery around Lysychansk, just over the river. That could have all been caught by the Russians. And you see the Russians are trying to expand, and they're managing to keep them in check to a certain degree.
It was that was probably second to Mariupol. That was in terms of its intensity. That was where it was really a matter of do you continue holding or do you make a retreat? I think it was just important that the commanders of those particular troops, they were, as I said, they were SAS, they're Marines and SEALs versions, those guys, and they got out of there pretty quick. They did suffer a fair big lost a lot of men. One particular battalion I read about, they lost up to 75% of their men. Yeah. So, but this might have been later. Not this. This might have been the fall of Lysychansk. That was more when they lost 80% of their battalion. Yeah. So it's been costly for them. It's been extremely costly for the Ukrainians.
It has. Now, if we have a look now, if we go back a little bit, we can see that eventually, now the Ukrainians had been defending Severodonetsk, but they were tasked with defending Lysychansk. Now, at this point, it looks like actually a little bit earlier, it looks like they ordered an evacuation. They decided that it was not worth fighting for this city because they were likely to be cut off and restricted from ammo and, probably suffer a similar fate to Mariupol.
Yeah. At this point, remember as well, the American howitzers hadn't arrived. They're also holding it. They were waiting on the German to send their long-range artillery. They were really pretty much working with the Stingers and the Javelins and just reasonably close, not close arms fire, but were pretty much within range. So obviously they needed to have the artillery, more artillery than they had, and mobile artillery as well, which they didn't have at that point, which mean the Russians had a very big advantage. They could just pound them from 20 k's back. Yeah.
So, I mean, there is a certain feeling from Ukraine that they're waiting for these new weapons in order to be able to match the Russian firepower. But this is the new front line the Ukrainians have established. I think it's just they've managed to keep Horivka, which was the place where they tried to cross the river previously. They've established a much more manageable front line, a better defensive positions strategically.
And what date's this now? What are we looking at there?
We're looking at today.
Because I'm thinking the next, for me, my mind, what I'm thinking now is the next thing they're going to be going for would be Sloviansk, probably, and Bakhmut. They're the two areas that they will probably now go for. And I think there's some fighting outside of Bakhmut
it's
and
pretty
Slovansk.
clear that they want to take Kramatorsk. They want to
Yeah.
take this region. They want to take this road network.
Mm.
But can they do it? And I guess a lot of that is going to depend on the West. What weapons we're willing to send Ukraine.
This is interesting. This is a really interesting area because what's happened at the moment, the Americans have been committing and they have sent a whole lot of howitzers, the mobile howitzers over, which is the Caesar systems. They're like they're a 155 millimeter howitzer. They're on the back of a truck. They are mobile. They are quick to set off. They're a French-built design, and I know that the French have sent those ones over. But the Americans are sending over the HIMARS system, and they basically have a 75-kilometer range. So this will change the whole dynamics of this. Once the artillery comes in, the heavy artillery that's needed by Ukraine, that's going to change everything. They can fire 6 rockets simultaneously, these HIMARS systems. They're Japanese design. They are absolutely unbelievable. They used them in the end of the Afghanistan war, and they have a range of 75 kilometers. This is the extraordinary mobile rocket system. But the Caesar system, they've got the 155 howitzers now. They've got about 16 of them, I think, at the moment, but they're getting another 18 from America. That's going to make a big difference. So when they get that coming in, they can basically fire, take off, and be gone in 16 to 18 seconds. So this is going to make a big difference. And then for the first time ever, Russia will be hit back with a punch that they haven't felt before because they haven't had.
They say in the Donbass, it's a lot of war of artillery, and I guess who can shoot further matters. And some of these systems, like the HIMARS or the slightly larger version that the UK and Germany are donating of basically the same system, it can shoot, 70 kilometers with the rockets we're giving them?
Yep.
It can shoot further, but we're not giving them the rockets that can shoot hundreds of kilometers.
If you see on the news, you'll see the footage. They're like a truck. So, I mean, if the Germans had this kind of howitzer gun on the back of a truck, mobile in the Second World War, I mean, the Blitzkrieg would have been even Blitzkrieg. They are so incredibly dangerous. You come out of a forest fully covered with camouflage. You could fire off and get back in the forest and take off again. You're gone within about 3 minutes. So they're pretty effective. They can't be zeroed in on by the enemy, so they're good. But what I think is going to probably change the whole ballpark of this could be these switchblades. Now, if you haven't heard about those, I think you have. We've talked before, Andy, but the switchblades are an American design drone, and they basically are super affordable. They're $10,000 for a Switchblade 300, and the 600s, I think, about $16,000. Now, when you fire one javelin, it's $75,000. When you fire a javelin anti-tank, the thermobaric explosion, and the same warhead, the thermobaric, is on this Switchblade 600. Now, what this is a tube that comes with 10 fold-up little aeroplanes that fires out of the tube, and it's all worked on a propeller at the back. They have a range, this will blow your mind, of 10 kilometers on the 300s that weigh 20 kilos, and then a 40-kilometer range on the 600s with the same, as I said, thermobaric head on it. Warhead, which will do a 40-kilometer range, and you can control them with a hand, just like a drone screen. And they have a 20-minute loitering ability, so they can just go round and round for 20 minutes after 40-kilometer range, and then go into a car window or go into the top of a tank. This is never been seen before in any.
I think they have another drone as well called the Phoenix Ghost drone that we haven't.
Yes, that's right.
They managed to put together for this war.
But these switchblades, they're going to send about 400 over. If this comes into this happens, I think they've got some there now, but if that happens, this is going to be a game changer, because never have we seen the likes of these very lightweight drones that are not detected by any radar because they're the size of birds. They cannot, there's no protection for them, and they can zero in with the laser guided hand controller. So that will really shake up the front lines of some of these artillery, especially when they're running a bit thin now.
Well, the other thing that drones are used for is spotting of the artillery, and that's really useful because obviously you can fire a lot of artillery shells quite cheaply and direct them, zero them in with the drone. And one of the artillery pieces that the Ukrainians have received is the Panzer Howitzer 2000 from Germany. And this thing can fire up to 40 kilometers.
Yeah,
Now,
they're brilliant. Yeah.
apparently, they used one of these to shell Snake Island from the mainland, which is almost 40
Wow.
kilometers. And the Russians, they had to abandon the island. They just didn't have
Yeah, they
any
did.
defense
Well,
against
that's
getting
a good
shelled.
that's a good segue into the next thing. And what is Ukrainians are doing in terms of taking back land? They're doing an incredible, admirable, and really courageous job. They've taken back Snake Island. We know the flag's up as of yesterday. I mean, Russia said it was just a give me. They gave it to them back. They didn't care about it. Well, not the case at all. They've also now making some headway to Kherson, trying to take that back. And obviously they've made more defensive positions around Odessa. But yeah, there is some move now. We've taken back Kharkiv. They've gone around the back. So there is some areas that they are pushing
I think
into.
we've seen minimal. We've seen minimal gains from the Ukrainians. I think they were hoping for more in Kherson. But I think what we've got to acknowledge with this war is it's not a war about a wonder weapon like this Panzer Blitzen or a Tiger tank.
Yeah, look at it. It's incredible. I know, just beautiful.
It's the whole orchestra of tools that you bring to war. Do you know what I mean? You need one system has a vulnerability that is counteracted by another system, which requires a different system to be able to aim for it, etc. It's all this integrated warfare. And a lot of this comes down to economics. Do you know what I mean? Who can keep putting the shells in the battlefield? Who can?
Well, this is the problem we're having with America. I mean, like, there's so much political. I mean, America's foreign policy has always been a bit debatable, and we know that they put themselves out there a lot of times where they shouldn't. But I mean, they're now gestured to give a whole lot of stuff across in terms of the HIMARS system and the Caesar systems and all these howitzers, but they're using it from current stock and reserves, so that when those reserves run out of these anti-aircraft and anti radar equipment for and also these howitzers, when they run out, they have to build them and then have to actually make them, and they'll have to get that's going to take weeks and weeks and months in some case to replenish. So at the moment they're okay. The Russians, I know how the Russian stock's going as well. They're running out of warheads.
If we consider just the raw economics of Russia with Ukraine backed by NATO, and then now this is just NATO, and I know other countries like Australia and Japan are also chipping in some money and resources. But if we just look at, now this is just NATO's European members, not even including America. You can see the scale that NATO outpaces Russia in
there's no question.
Production.
There's no question in the world. I mean, the moment Russia has had obviously a time to think about this and to stockpile their stuff, so they went into an invasion with advantage, the upper hand. However, you know, with the likes of all the finally Germany getting their act together and sending a whole lot of stuff across, and the British have done pretty well. But the moment there's going to be a period of time where they'll run out. They'll run out of soldiers. They're going to run out of men. They're going to run out of. Well, they're running out of warheads.
We can see on this pie graph that is the part of the pie that Russia has in military spending in NATO alone. So, but the question is, perhaps the Russians, you know, they're willing to put 100% of their economy. They're willing to have their kids eat dirt and pack ammo crates all day. Whereas we in the West, we are decadent, as Putin says. We are not willing to sacrifice, 3% or whatever would be required to match Russia 50%.
We saw that in the Second World War with Germany. Every single person was working in factories, making planes, they were just continually working 100% to do what they did. They had to, because it was such a reasonably small country taking on most of the world. But same thing, Russia could do that too, quite easily. I agree. But
in theory, in a numbers game, the West, which NATO and America, simply needs about, if we look at the numbers, they only need to put out about 3% of the pain that Russia does to equal its maximum production, wartime production. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. We were talking, I think America's, 20 trillion GDP. And then there's 1.7 at the moment GDP for Russia. That goes for their current ruble, which is going through the roof, and the $135 a barrel oil, whatever. They still can't nowhere near America's GDP, and the money that America put into their military is astonishing.
So let's talk about the West's willingness to fight. How willing is the West to fight? How willing are we to take the economic pain? Now, these guys have been talking about possibly winning the war, expelling Russia from Ukraine. Do you think they have the resources and will to keep it going?
My view on this whole thing. I mean, I'm a war buff like yourself, and I do like to follow things that are happening. No one likes to see a war. A war is very sad, and it's extremely sad for everybody, including world famine and what's happening with there's a whole different category with all the grain and the food that 80% of the world gets from Russia and Ukraine that's causing starvation and right around the world right now. But apart from that, no one wants to see a war. But the only way I can see this is a very dangerous experiment, Andy, because what we're looking at here is a man with a great pride, a great Soviet Union kind of backing of history. He wants to sort of reignite. Along those lines, he wants to continue the great Russia. Now, do you think he's going to give up for 1 second? Do you think he's going to slink back into the corner and cower back into the dark shadows as a bit of a loser, not actually doing his objective, plus the ridiculous, bewildering, pathetic invasion that was obviously hanging over his head now? He's embarrassed himself in that regard. He can't even take little villages across the border in another country. They're only 100 miles from the Russian border. You can't even take those. So I don't think Putin will ever give up. I think he'll have to go the whole way. The problem is, if he's backed into a corner like a wild animal in a cage, what do they do? That's the scariest thing. So to me,
we that's know one threat, the nuclear threat.
That's right. And he's got nuclear. Well, they got, I think at the moment, 4,800 nuclear warheads, not to mention there's been the treaty where they got rid of the big mass weapons of mass destruction back in after the Cold War. But
proliferation treaties.
This is the problem. There's nuclear. There's also chemical weapons. You open a Pandora's box. Look, I don't think he's going to give up. And then what do we do? Like we've got.
I mean, what do you do in the face of that, Andrew? Do you cower like some of these guys, or we say, look, we've got these weapons too. You use them.
Yeah, I know. You know what my view is? There's got to be. I think everyone's got to keep a cool head. I think really right now, as a famous general, British general said at Waterloo, you've got to keep your head while others about you are losing theirs. And you've got to keep very calm and very rational, because here's a man who has got. There's only two possible outcomes that can happen really here. One is that the West continues empowering Ukraine with weaponry and armament to push Russia back. And what will Russia do if they get pushed back? I mean, if Putin's up against a wall, what does he do? That's the first scary thing. The second scary thing is that is he going to go away and just take off and just tail for things? It's not going to happen. So now we go into a situation where it just goes on and on like Afghanistan until the last person standing. Yeah, it's diplomatic. To me, diplomatic negotiations we need to end this somehow quickly. And the only way is.
Let me frame how I see the two sides. Now, we've got the mainly English-speaking side with a few extra people, like the Eastern Europeans, the Australians, perhaps, and we're looking to generally expel Russia from most of Ukraine. Maybe not Crimea, but most of the rest of it. Right? That's the stated aim. Whereas the Europeans, they've kind of tied their economy up with Russia. We warned them for years, but they kept on doing it. Merkel from Germany was the main candidate. Now, I think they are out of place. They don't feel in an easy place. They would love to see this war come to an end as quickly as possible. But on the other hand, they realize their populations don't want to see democratic values getting eroded in Europe. And they see Ukraine as the rightful, owner of that territory, not Russia. And they see the unfairness of Putin taking that from them with his military force. So they're in a
Yeah,
bit more of a difficult position because inflation is rising, economics. They've got a lot of these European countries have large debts. They're going to have to
yeah,
raise
yeah.
their interest rates to deal with this inflation. It might
Mm.
put them in a rather sticky position.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, to be honest, this is a turning point in our modern, 21st century, to have one of the largest, threatening nations in the world with nuclear arms to actually now be saber rattling and saying, we've got this, we can use it, we will, and they'll change the dynamics, he said, of everything you've never seen before. This is scary stuff. I think what I think we should do is we should be negotiating through diplomatic. This is my view on how to end this. We need to end it as soon as possible, and the only way to end it would be a diplomatic resolution with a negotiation. So it's going to be a win-win. There's got to be a win-win, right?
The
And the only way it's
question
going to
is,
happen.
though,
Yeah.
can you negotiate with Putin? Will he tell you the truth? Or will he
Well,
just tell you what you want to hear and
yeah,
build
true.
more forces for his next stage? You know what I mean? I
Because
really
because
don't think
because
it.
Yeah, I agree. And people are saying this was an unprovoked attack. Now, that isn't essentially wrong, because at the end of the day, for all you don't like, everyone didn't like about Trump or whatever, he was always dead against Ukraine going into NATO. He said you can't do that. You can't have them in there. Yeah, you can help them a little bit, but then when Biden got in, he kind of like everything happened in NATO became a big thing. Everyone, get Ukraine in NATO. So you're poking the Russian bear. And what happened now? This was a provoked attack, because he was so adamant that if Ukraine ever goes near NATO, he's going to go. He's going to go. That was the last. That was like Poland, crossing Poland, Second World War. We're at war with
To
them.
be fair, though, Ukraine wasn't actually going to join NATO, was it? We hadn't
True.
actually
No.
said yes. We hadn't even started any process with Ukraine. And last time they tried to join, I think it was Merkel and Sarkozy at the time that
Yeah.
denied that.
But there was a lot of talk about getting in and joining and this and that just stirred up Putin to a point where this has been, in a way, a provoked attack. It wasn't. I keep seeing unprovoked attack, unprovoked attack. This is like it is barbaric what they've done. There's war crimes. There's everything. It's just it's appalling. But there was some sort of a lot of, in a way, there was a lot of, poking, stirring, at the front border with your hand wiggling in your nose. So I think Russia then just went, okay, that's the final straw. That's it. So for me, if they say, look, why don't you give, and I know Zelensky wants to negotiate, but America and NATO won't let him. This is what's coming out now. He
I'm
wants
not
us.
so sure, Andrew. I think
You reckon? Because
with
he
the
wants to give the.
Ukrainians having taken that many dead and losses,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
not at the point where they're willing to
I think he's willing to let the
give away
Donbass
land.
go. I think he's willing to let the Donbass go. I think if he can do that and do a negotiation so you can have that and we'll be neutralized, we'll still be a neutral country. We won't take NATO. We won't go involved. I think it could be enough for what you've got a picture there, the two negotiation. It could happen. It could happen. But I think the
Well,
way we're going is a scary experiment. This is a very dangerous to keep going, more arms and more this and more that. And this is getting really, really scary. And I think we need someone to come in and just diplomatically sort of negotiate a truce at some point. Now, we saw Napoleon like 100 years, 200 years ago, that he was literally took all of Europe, except he failed at the very end. He did a pretty good job though. But when he got taken and got obliterated, basically they put him away. But they said some negotiation was, we'll give you France. France comes back. France has autonomy, Versailles, and they gave it back. So even though he was a tyrant and a dictator, they still had a negotiation process to fix it. So,
and then Andrew he came back and started another war with us, and we exiled them up to now.
Versailles, yeah, I know. But I think
But
there's really, yeah. Hopefully, I'd love to see the end of this. This is just, it's interesting to watch, and I love commenting on it. But yeah, it's a series, very scary times. Jack,
one of
really
the
scary.
things I wanted to touch on was the change in Germany. Now they had
Mm,
sat since the post-war era, um, especially since the Cold War era, probably since the
mm,
World War II era, but they were kind of controlled by two sides during the Cold War era and had quite a big army. But since the Cold War has ended, they've kind of relied on this peace dividend. They're barely spending 1% of their economy on their army. And what they
yeah,
do spend seems to be riddled with bureaucracy. They don't actually seem to get the numbers that you'd expect from that kind of money. I don't know if a lot of it is going into wages or bureaucracy or what, but the Germans really didn't care about being a military power up till now, and
No,
they've woken up. And the other thing they had was they had a huge trading relationship with Germany. So the deal was kind of, we'll give you money
oil and
and
gas,
steel,
and
you give us the raw materials, the oil, the gas. And that was the backbone of a lot of German manufacturing. Number one exporter in the world, apart from China. They can do that cheaply because they've got access to cheap resources, cheap fuel, and a lot of cheap labor within the EU. So
that's right.
that is a mainstay of their economy. And if you take away those cheap Russian resources, you take away that cheap Russian gas and oil, how is the German economy going to be left? Is it still going to be competitive?
Well, I mean, to actually think, this is also another whole Pandora's box. Like Germany has been held back for the Second World War, having their military under so many, details about that. But we won't go into that too much. But they've been held back. But suddenly now you've got a situation where Germany are putting 2.5%. Schulz has set up with 2.5% of GDP into armament and military. This is a first. This has never happened in the last 35 years. This is quite scary because when Germany actually gets moving, that's another unknown. We know that Germany is an alliance and NATO and all that, but it's another scary thing with Germany being, basically the engineers of the world and the technically brilliant of that. What they can do with their army could be very, very scary,
Well, let's concentrate on the Russian threat for now.
Yeah, I know.
A potential German threat, right? Which isn't very big.
I've got some good German friends. I've got some good
still.
German friends, and they're good people. I'm just saying, we're not talking about the old days, but it's just something that again is all changing because of the landscape of what's happening. Everyone's now armoring up, and
One of the things they previously wouldn't even consider was Nord Stream 2. They had a new gas pipeline coming from Russia. That has been cancelled, and now we're talking about drawing down the Nord Stream 1. And
that's right.
even without us doing anything, the Russians seem to be making excuses with maintenance projects where very little gas is even pumping through that pipeline at the moment.
This is a worry for Germany. I mean, I think they're feeling the brunt. I mean, I know we're having a hard time here with fuel price increases, but nothing like Great Britain, UK, or Germany. There, I think it's $3.80 a litre over there, which is nearly half again what we're paying here.
And the other thing I wanted to mention was the question of how serious are the Germans about, reestablishing their army as a serious force, because we all know that it takes decades to build a good army. You need to invest in these platforms, which are getting longer and longer to actually return something. You need to train your troops. You need an integrated system. The German army is still having to borrow things from one unit would have to borrow from several units just to get enough stuff to go on a NATO exercise, and not look silly, basically. Get some helmets and enough ammo to fire off, etc.
That's true. It does take a while, but I mean, Germans are very resilient, incredibly, and
But will they have the political will in a year from now? If the war is in a stalemate, that would be my question.
That's a good question.
The West is obviously, we're giving stuff. We're giving stuff from our stockpiles currently. Now, let's talk about. So the Russians, they have a famously large Soviet stockpile of stuff, and we also have a stockpile in the West. I mean, we could probably give the Ukrainians a lot more. We could certainly give them 1,000 tanks. We could certainly give them various things. Now, they might not be the best tanks, but we could deliver more from our stockpiles. But there's been this question of, how much are we allowed to give them without making Putin escalate?
That's exactly right. And this is the fine balance here. This is what I said before. The more we keep arming Ukraine and giving stuff to Ukraine, and at one point, if Putin is pushed back and he's starting to lose, this is on the world stage. Everyone's watching this. I mean, there's no idea what he could do. I mean, this is the scary point. I mean, do you want to put him in a situation where he looks stupid, always losing, always in a corner? Do you want that? Probably not. Very, very dangerous situation. Very dangerous.
So,
And
I
you've got
mean,
to give defensive weapons to just be defensive. You can't give offensive weapons where they're going to cause. Then he goes, "Hang on, you're staying now. You're not defending yourself. You're now actually attacking me." I mean, which
the
is
line is very blurred because I mean, what's defensive, what's offensive? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I know.
you could almost reprogram the same missile to, instead of doing air to air, it could do air to ground, or it's very artillery is considered defensive because of the range.
Yeah.
But other systems, is artillery really defensive? It's not
Or is it
defensive.
they call it usually
Belgorod or
a strategic hit or a non-strategic hit, and then that defines whether it's whether it's an offensive or defensive situation. But I don't know. I can only see this getting this is getting worse.
I'm
By the
not
moment.
sure it makes a great deal of logical sense to define things in offensive and defense because it just gets so blurry.
Yeah, it
Do you know
does.
what I
Yeah.
mean? But not only this, so I mean, we have been giving Ukraine artillery. We have been giving Ukraine, obviously, HIMARS now. We are giving Ukraine
Mm.
man-pads, javelins. What is the capacity of the
Stingers.
West and its companies to replenish not only the stuff that we've given to them, but produce new stuff, keep them in Stinger missiles and artillery and 155 millimeter artillery shells and whatever they
Yeah.
need.
Well, this is what I read yesterday. The Americans are using reserves to do this. I know we built Australia. Our Prime Minister went over yesterday and had looked through Butcher and met Zelensky, but he's offered, I think, 27 bush rangers, which is our armored vehicles. They are exceptional. They were used in Afghanistan so effectively. They are literally fast, quick. They go over everything. But he's given 28 armored vehicles, bush rangers. But at the end of the day,
28
yeah,
that size.
yeah, it's not a lot, but it can carry 8 troops. They're quite mobile, quite quick. The thing is, though, America's giving reserves. When they run out, they're going to have to build and pay and contract for that. With the Europeans, they're going to have to get the Germans to build them. That can take ages, and not just weeks, months, but 3 or 4 months to build some of these
So
things.
the
So it's going
West
to be,
doesn't have a wartime, weapon production economy like it did in World War II, or
yeah,
I don't know,
yeah,
maybe America had such a thing in Vietnam as well, right?
yeah.
Boris has been over to the Thales defense, looking at what rockets are being produced, trying
Mm.
to bolster them to increase production. Now over in America, Biden has been doing very similar. He's been off to, I think it was Raytheon, to try and say, look, guys, can you get us some more of these things quickly, please?
Yeah, yeah.
He looks a
I
bit
suppose.
bewildered here.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I can see where this is going, and I think that yes, NATO can continue supplying Ukraine with the latest technology, and either the only thing we can hope is it can hold Russia back. They draw a line in the sand. They say, "Well, take the Donbass, have a nice day. Let's all go home and shake hands." But if they don't, and they can actually push Russia back or do something, or I just don't like I got a bad feeling about Putin's attitude towards that, and I just don't know if this is the right experiment to be doing right
Well,
now. It's so scary. It's
well,
if you
let's
win,
not
if you win, you
let's
lose.
not
Mm,
overestimate our adversaries, Andrew. I would say,
yeah.
let's talk about the Russians. So
Mm,
the Russian side, what is their willingness to fight? I mean, Putin personally, he sees this as a matter of personal survival.
yeah.
But there's also the Russian state, those around him. A lot of the businessmen, they're losing money over this. And I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
even the military guys, they can't go to Switzerland on holiday nice and easily or go to their
Mm,
French villa and sail their yacht anymore. So
mm, mm.
there is definitely going to be some pushback. And the Russian not to mention the Russian economy.
Yeah.
How long are the people in Russia? Now, we'll talk about that in a minute, but
Mm.
the people in Russia are suffering a bad economy and they're suffering a bunch of casualties as well.
Mm. I agree, and I think the way I look at this thing is like two bombs. There's a bomb, like a little, with a fuse on it on the Ukrainian side. There's a bomb, the fuse on the Russian side. We've lit them both. They're going along, and the Russian fuse is this. The whole economy, the sanctions, which are not doing that great at the moment, but because everyone's paying in rubles, so the ruble's gone up. But there's the sanctions, there's the domestic environment. People are dying, coming back in body bags. People are losing their sons. So that's fizzing in to a point where they'll just have enough, and they're running out of missiles, and they're running out of warheads, and running out of men, and they're
So
that's that one.
let's talk about
The Ukrainian
what you
fizzing
mentioned
one.
there briefly, which was the sanctions and the ruble, right?
Mm.
So the sanctions, we put unprecedented sanctions. Everybody thought, the Russian economy, it won't last 5 months,
Mm.
but they seem to keep going. And we can see from the chart here, I'll just load up the ruble, where it initially crashed by about, I
One
think,
point.
50% or something, but it was back up within weeks.
Yeah, it's back up again. It's why? Because a lot of they've stopped the calls on a lot of the amount of money that's put in the market. They've stopped the calls. They've also asked everyone
The capital
to
controls.
capital control. They've also asked everyone to pay in rubles for their gas. Got to pay cash, and they've stopped all that monetary movement out of the country. So it's got a little dead cat bounce there. But the problem is, though, it's the first time in 100 years they've failed to make their payments on their overseas debt.
Oh, yes, the recent default. Now, their
Default.
argument is that it was our financial sanctions that stopped them paying that because,
Yeah.
they
The chicken
couldn't
and egg.
transfer the money away. We've got all the money, but we
Yeah.
can't transfer it to you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the economy's doing great. I think certainly oligarchs and all the people with money are really quite pissed because their lifestyles have changed. There's going to be a lot. So that's part of that fuse burning back to the bomb on the outside to blow it all up and self-destruct it. That just the will of the people eventually wear thin. They don't want to do this, and it's a war of attrition, but it's a war of time too. That the longer it goes, it's going to be more dangerous for
That's
Russia.
the definition of a war of attrition. Which side can take the pain the longest? Do you know what I mean?
Well,
Which
that's
side's
the
going to
thing.
give up and lose
The
the
other,
will?
well, the other bomb with the fuse on the Ukrainian side is fizzing along because it's got to run out eventually of hardware and military support. It'll run out of men, obviously. It'll run out of. So which fuse is going to go off first? Which bomb goes off first? That's kind of the way I look at it. But also,
Yeah.
as
Well, the Ukrainians are obviously supported by the West. They probably wouldn't have even gone on this long. So that's why we looked at the UK, the US, and the Europeans. Now,
yeah.
I would say the thing about sanctions is they have been banned from, everything from updating Windows to gas turbine equipment, replacement parts.
McDonald's are pulled out, as you said. McDonald's, which has been bought by another oligarch, is called it some other name, Burger Joint or something,
Tasty
whatever.
and fresh or something, or tasty and that's it. My Russian friend said he didn't like the name. I don't think he liked it. But I have seen some pictures of moldy burgers. But the general opinion is it's roughly the same. But will standards drop now that there's not multinational McDonald's keeping all the standards up in Russia?
Yeah, and
We will see,
due diligence and it's just.
But I think it's a slow grind with these sanctions. These replacement parts, they don't break immediately. They don't need new things immediately. But over time, it starts to tell.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I
Economy
mean,
starts to leak.
Yeah. I mean,
There's no way the Russians can replace everything that the West produces because we produce so much. No country produces everything that's required in a high-tech laptop even. You know what I mean? Let alone more.
Well, that's right. Their imports have gone down 48% since the war. Their imports are they're not doing it. They're not even getting any imports, and they're basically just exporting this coal, oil and gas. Of course, lithium and the copper and silver. They got abundance, absolute abundance of minerals. I mean, it's just you can't compete. It's
So it
ridiculous how much.
seems like there's two stories in Russia's economy. There's the natural resources that people seem to struggle to do without, and then there's the service sector and technology sector, which is really struggling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They can't.
Now,
They can't.
even if their economy is struggling, they still have huge stocks of these Soviet weapons. You know,
God.
I've seen that they've recently dropped down to
That's a great photo.
T-62 tanks. But there's no doubt the Russians have a huge amount of artillery shells and all the basics, which we've now got to supply Ukraine with.
Yeah, true. I mean, do you think, obviously, it's summertime there now, it's ideal situation for close arms fire and just mechanics and everything works well in warm weather. But do you think the coming winter is going to change the dynamics of what's happening there?
Well, I think it's harder for the Ukrainians when the Russian tank fleets can go over the fields. They're not stuck on the road. They're not so ambushed. It's much harder. They can run over trenches. It's just lucky they have destroyed so much of the Russian tanks already in this war.
Yeah.
The Russians are down. I think their tank fleet is definitely going down in quality. You know what I mean? The Russian armored divisions, they're using BTR-1s more often. They're using older tanks. I mean, I guess a lot of this stuff's in the rear. They're still trying to put the good stuff up to the front line.
Well, they even use the T-14 Armatas. I haven't seen many of those at all. They modified them all with those stupid gun turrets.
I don't think they have any to deploy. I don't think they even have a battalion of these things. The only place you see them is in the parade, and perhaps in the promo documents selling them to the rest of the world.
They had about 10,000 at the start of the war. I think they've probably got 2 if they're lucky. The
Su-57 is another one. It's practically completely absent.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that is an interesting point, Andrew. Where are all these winter weapons that the Russians were supposed to have? Let me tell you another thing the Russians were supposed to have. The Russians were supposed to have basic things that we've had for 40 years, like night vision.
Yeah.
They don't have night, unless they're very special Spetsnaz, extra special Spetsnaz, they ain't going to have night vision. Now, why is that? Now, I'll tell you a little story that will take you down the rabbit hole of the Russian corruption. That is a company that was apparently set up, advanced sensors or something in Russia, that was set up by a guy who was connected with Putin's chef.
Oh, wow.
His army general's sons. However, they have spent a large number of $1 billion, and they still can't produce the sensor that is necessary to produce night vision equipment.
You're kidding.
So the only way they're going to get good night vision is to buy it from the West right now, until they get that supply chain of sensors sorted out.
And where do they need night vision? Close combat, small arms fire, city fighting. So they're not going to need them now while they're just bombarding howitzers from 40 kilometers away. But
they would have needed them in Severodonetsk a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, they would have. Yeah, exactly.
Another thing, surprisingly, the Russians are struggling with is they're asking China for ready-to-eat meal ration packs, because it's been discovered that some of theirs on the battlefield are expiring in 2015, 2017.
2-minute noodles are probably big.
Apparently, this is another contract that Putin's chef, his main man, won. But he seems to be using out-of-date Soviet ones. Very strange. I wonder where the money went.
This is the worry too with this, what's happening in terms of just the alliance of China now coming. This is more forcing the alliance of China with Russia and India to a certain degree. They haven't joined the sanctions, nor has Indonesia. I mean, the Indonesian Prime Minister was over there just recently talking, whether he was talking to Putin about trying to do the negotiation thing, or whether he was actually going, "Hey mate, I'm on your side." I don't know. It's scary. So you got situations where you got the African states aren't doing the sanctions. You've got some of the Asian countries, as I just said, in India and China. This alliance could be very dangerous, and the more we do this, the more we're pushing the reliance on China, because they know they can get the food, they get the materials, they can get
There's
everything. They
even
can get
been stories of the Russians selling fuel and not having fuel to put in their vehicles because they've already sold it just to make a few extra.
oh my gosh.
So we know there is waste in the Russian system, right? We know there's corruption.
Yeah.
And another thing the Russians have been struggling with is troop numbers. You know, they've had a lot of people killed. A lot of their special forces got killed at the start of the war. They had a very high attrition rate. In fact, it was so high at the start of the war, they just couldn't keep it going. So they're now having to mass conscript people in the Donbass, you know, and the Russian soldiers.
Well, they're also conscripting people for 12 months, 12-month service, including an ice hockey player that took off and didn't want to. They caught him and put him in the front lines up near the north.
Apparently, they want to swap that basketball player for, because she got caught with hash seed oil. They consider her a major drug dealer, and they want some serious Russian weapons dealer in exchange.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. That's what I mean. Now the kids are being conscripted at 19 for 12 months. So you've got a lot of inexperience coming in now, and a lot of the battle-hardened battalions and leaders and generals are being killed. I think it's up to 30,000 reports of Russian soldiers killed. They're saying 14 or 4,000, but I think we're looking at least 25 to 30,000 Russian soldiers. And think of that compared to the Vietnam War. They lost 54,000 men over 12 years. It's a huge toll.
Putin did not go for declaring it a war. He's keeping it a special military operation. If he declared it as a war, he could go for full conscription and bring a lot more people into his army. But we heard a clip from one of the Russian generals on Russian TV saying the problem with that is they just don't have enough modern equipment to give to all these new troops.
That's right. Yep. Oh, they don't. And they're not trained. They haven't got sort of basic training. They're just pretty much shipped over there. This is the problem they're going to be facing down the track if this goes on to another winter next year. It'll definitely look like going into next year. They're saying possibly, if the way things are going, another year and a half to 2 years.
So let's talk about a resolution to this war, right? What would a Russian win or a Soviet win or whatever you want to call them there, the Russians, what would they consider a win? Is taking the Donbass enough? Obviously, their initial intention was to take the whole country and turn it into a puppet state or a friendly state, depending on who you listen to. But now they seem to be saying, right, we'll take the Donbass and we'll stop. That's it. I mean, what are you hoping for if you're President Putin? What looks like a win to you now?
Well, obviously, we know that when he went in, he had so much military build up at the border. I think he thought he was going to go straight into Kiev, raise the flag, do the march, install a puppet government, and they're on their way with the convoy, 10-kilometer convoy. They're just stuck there. They thought they would just go in like we did. Well, we and the American went in at Iraq, which is another whole story. But that was pretty quick, 3 days or so till it went to the capital. But that was done properly. But see, that's his intention to go and take the whole country. Now he knows he can't, and he's up against an incredible, brave outfit of courageous and spirited army against him. I think he's now
knows he's in a war of attrition with the West.
That's right, and he's also got up against unlimited numbers of resources that can be thrown at the Ukraine people to defend themselves. So he might now say, you know what, I'll draw a line here, and I'll take the Donbass. But the deal will be you'll be neutralised. You won't be a part of NATO. That's the only one I'm going to allow. You'll be independent, as you were in the Minsk agreement. And this is what he'll want. That could be the one way of ending it. But if they keep pushing and Ukraine keeps saying, no, we want the Donbass back, and we're going to push you back, and goes on for 2 or 3 years, well, God knows what would happen, because
I think that's what Putin's counting on. He believes the West is weak and we won't be able to see this through. So his plan is to keep it going on, perhaps obviously a lower intensity, because he can't take this level of attrition. and hope that we stop supplying the Ukrainians or remove the support to a point that he can start making gains again.
Yeah, there's no way in the world. Putin's not an idiot. I mean, there's no way in the world he could honestly sit there at home and say, I could take NATO on, I can win. I mean, there's no way in the world that's going to happen. If he was to have a war against NATO, I mean, he might get one button pushed. That'd be about it, and it'd be all over. You would not see Russia again for another 50 years. It'll be all back to the Stone Age.
So we know he's not likely to invade Poland.
No, he's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. I don't think he'll even flinch over Sweden and Norway joining NATO. I don't think that's going to be a problem. Even though they've got a bigger border than probably Ukraine, a more dangerous border too. I think he just wants this part because it was the old Russia. You know, Kiev was the old Russia. There's ours. It was like it's just become an obsession with him. But whether he's going to try and go the whole way, he can't do it. I mean, there's no way
So
he can take Kiev.
He thinks he can outlast us. He thinks we're fickle. He thinks the news cycle will move on. And perhaps he is right to a certain degree. Yeah, but can Russia's economy, can their system withstand the pressures of this war? How long can they go? You know? No,
it can't. It definitely can't. It can't withstand the backup of NATO, which is obviously America with its 20 trillion GDP, Germany number 2 or 3, I think, on the list with 12 GDP trillion a year. The money they can put into this to defend that as a point of reference to say, look, you just can't do this on a moral issue. Take a country and just invade it, even though you were provoked by the fact that your brothers or your original Soviet Union land was going to be put into NATO hands. I think he just he'll continue going as far as he can. Yeah, I agree. I think he will. Now
there'll come a point, obviously, where the Russian army, they don't have enough new soldiers, they don't have enough new equipment.
That's the worry. That is the scary thing.
Parts. There is a limit to how far Russia.
Once the tide turns. Yeah, Jack, once the tide turns and these new switchblades or the HIMARS system comes in, the Caesar systems, the new aircraft, once it's just like the no-fly zone. You can't make a no-fly zone because if you do that, then you're going to have to take down their artillery, and that becomes a whole. Then it's really war. It's war. Is it NATO attacking us now? Then they go, that's it. It's war. Yeah, war with NATO. He just wants one excuse. So once that starts slipping, and Russia starts slipping, which could happen because the undying support everyone has for Ukraine, this is going to get scary. That's when you're going to start saying, well, what's he going to do now? What is he going to do? He's going to slink back into the corner like a coyote or a hyena from the lions of the carcass. I don't think he will. I think he'll just stand there.
Well, on the other hand, as you said, there's 2 fuses burning. Let's talk about the other fuse, the Ukrainians. Now, their economy is, I don't know, it's down like 40 or 50%. They can barely export their food. They're under severe economic pressure, and they're relying on the backing of other countries, which is obviously difficult in a war. They've got all the will to fight in the world, but do they have the economics and enough support from the West, us, in weapons and resources to keep going and maybe even push back the Russians?
Well, I think if you combine their spirit and their determination to fight for their own land with the backing of 4 major, the biggest countries in the world supporting them, I think they could go on forever. I mean, I think that nothing could stop it, and they will just continue fighting. And this is what we found in Afghanistan. The Taliban just would not relinquish. They would just keep going and going. And we saw the Mujahideen with, against the Russians back before that. It's just the same thing.
And the Ukrainians have a lot of fight left in them and will keep going in the Ukrainian army as long as the West, these guys, keep supporting them. So the question then becomes,
absolutely.
It's the determining factor is the West support. That's what we're coming down to. We think the Russians, they're going to go as far as they can. They're going to push this war of attrition to the limit that they can. The Ukrainians, they've got the will to fight. They're going to keep fighting the Russians and try and get them off their land as long as we keep supplying them equipment. The question then becomes, how long are these guys, the biggest nations in the world, the US, the UK, Japan,
going to keep funding it? Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, and especially as it's going to be economic pain for their populations. The inflation is going up. The interest rates are going to come up. There's going to be shortages in food, obviously. where does the pressure point come with the West?
Well, it's funny, in war you usually have in any war you take land, and land is a determination factor if you're winning the war or losing the war, because you just keep taking more land. That's the case in this war. This is all about land, and sovereignty and taking someone else's country. But like, for instance, Vietnam was the first country where we had a North and South Vietnam, but we didn't have a really a land grab, because it was like hill here, hill there, this hill was taken, that was still taken the next day. So in the end, Westmoreland said, look, forget land. We can't even monitor who's winning. Let's have body count. Well, that's how we'll do it. We'll do body count. So whoever has a more body count winning the war. And that, in a way, in a sense, with this, they're going to run out of people. They're going to run out of soldiers. They're going to run out of young men. They're going to run out of people. But Ukrainians have got 100,000 civilians up the age of 60 that can continue just fighting, where Russia hasn't got that. They can't script 60-year-old men to go and fight, and they won't. They won't.
Well, they could conscript those young men in Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Yeah,
but
that's
they don't
right.
want to do that politically. Do you know what I mean?
So I don't see this ending really well at all. I don't know. I don't know how it can end, because I think it could be just like two tug of wars with two strong supported teams with the NATO on the back of Ukraine, and this idiot just continually bulldozing and just mincemeating his way across the country, just leveling every city he comes to, and then saying we own it. I don't know. I think negotiation and diplomacy, and somehow come to a table and say, let's draw a line, guys. Let's do this. You can have that.
It's difficult to see us negotiating with Putin right now, though, isn't it?
I know.
And so my conclusion, I'm going to give a conclusion on this. I think this war is not really going to come down to, obviously it's going to come down to the military, but it's going to come down to the economics of military. It's going to come down to who's willing to put that GDP on the table for long enough, take the pain, of not building schools and hospitals and supplying these guys with enough artillery and possibly tanks and anything else they need to keep fighting, and obviously restricting our supply of all the things that we used to get from Russia.
Yep. I totally, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. You're pretty spot on, because at the end it'll be who runs out of money, basically. Who runs out of money, and that's runs out of money,
well,
and really runs.
We know that if we push it to the limit, Russia will run out of money first. Just from the size of it.
Yeah, of course, they're just on pure.
Do we have the will to do that? And are we going to have the will to do that if we've got a recession of minus 2% GDP, etc.? The housing market potentially falling with high interest rates.
Yeah.
That's the question for the West.
It's interesting because America's so far away. I understand the NATO countries bordering all concerned and worried, because they could be next, and look at Lithuania, or there could be Belarus is on the other side. But you could see them all worried, being right in there with nuclear, arms shot. But America is so far away, and they've got to be a part of that. They've got to do the right thing. I get that. But really, I don't know why they're again stoking the fire. They're getting in there. They did this in a way with Afghanistan. They said, I think the famous thing was, until the last Afghan dies, we'll be there, and they just want to fight Russia. That was
Ukrainian. Well, Biden and the Democrats are saying that this is, a pinnacle, an important moment for democracy, showing that can't reestablish the map, like post World War II, by invading other countries with aggression, especially not democracies. So I understand why they feel that way. It's just, will they still be so principled, if Biden's looking at losing an election because fuel prices are high, unemployment's high, and housing market's shot? That's the question. So I'll leave that with you guys. How long can the West take the economic pain? How far are we willing to go? We can win if we're willing to go all the way, but it might be a tough ride.